Welcome. So I am so glad you've joined us to launch Randy's new novel, The Many Mothers of Ivy Puddingstone. It's a bit of a mouthful. Randy is the author of 6 novels and a nonfiction book. Is that right?
Yeah, a book of essays.
Book of essays, okay. Her books have been translated into over 30 languages. I'm Ellen Meeropol, and I'm the author of 5 novels and co-editor of an anthology, Dreams for Our Broken World. We read fiction for a lot of reasons. We read for fun, for entertainment, for sure, distraction, especially now. But we also read to dig deeper into what it means to be human, into understanding how our world works, and to ask and maybe even answer some hard questions. We write fiction for those same reasons, and some of us write to try to inspire, to connect, to cajole readers to think about the world and maybe even to act. I met Randy 15 years ago at a writers' conference. Her first novel, The Murderer's Daughters, was just out, and my first novel was under contract, but not yet in physical form. So I was in awe of her. We clicked, we hit it off right away, partly because we realized that our passions as fiction writers were similar, and that we were really trying to deal with some of the same issues. Still, I've got to admit that when you told me, Randy, what this book was about, I was nervous. You know, I mean, think about it. A book about a commune, about young activists trying to change the world, and they've got kids, and they're trying to balance parenting and activism. And it took place in the years 1964 to 2020. Well, I lived those years, and that's my life. And I was really worried that my author friend, Randy, was going to get it wrong. And then what was I going to do? So, you know, we all have our own personal history, and when you find that history in a novel, it can be either incredibly wonderful, or it can really irritate you. So I am incredibly glad that she got it right. And I'm really glad that you're all here to help us bring this book into the world, because today is Pub Day, right? Yeah, so welcome, Many Mothers of Ivy Puddingstone. To get us started, would you read some from your book?
I have a loud voice. Among my other many jobs, I was a bartender. And when I said last call, they left. Is that a little better? When people ask me if I need a mic, I usually say, not really, because I really don't. But, okay. My husband, I'm sounding like Henny Youngman, right? Put this together so that I could actually turn the pages. And even though I said, Jeff, stop, he is the most wonderful husband in the world, except for maybe Ellie's, so there you go. Thank you for inviting me here. Having been, let me know if you can't hear me and you need me to speak louder. Having been raised by the Brooklyn Public Library, events like these are always my favorites. So thank you, Priya. Thank you very much. And a brief story, very brief, about going to the library. I went to the library every day, and though I generally lie all the time, that one is not a lie, because I read so much and so fast, and you can only take out so many as a kid, that I had to keep going back and forth. And my home life was, what did they say, complicated, Jill? A tad. And was my passion and escape, but I was afraid about what the librarian thought of me, because my book choices weren't that intellectual. So I would always pick 2 smart books. I don't know what I did, David Copperfield every week, and put one on the top and one on the bottom and hope that she would only judge me by the top and the bottom. Years later, I realized, A, they probably didn't care what I took out. B, they were very, very kind to me. So, Priya, from that little girl back on McDonald Avenue, thank you so much. And that's why I love events at libraries. I mean, libraries, right? What's better? So, I'd like to begin by reading a condensed version of the prologue of The Many Mothers of Ivy Puddingstone. In this novel, I explore unusual family dynamics. Family meaning chosen family and biological ties within the turbulent political and social changes from the beginning of Freedom Summer in 1964, that's where it opens after the prologue, to going through the early stages of the pandemic in 2020. A little bit of research. We see the world through the eyes of a mother, Annabelle, and daughter, Ivy, before and after a tragedy. So this that I'm going to read, my husband says you can't stop to drink, so I'm going to drink now. Okay, honey? He's dying over there. This is Ivy's college admission essay from 1984. Once upon a time, I belonged to a tribe of kids who ran free, too free. I grew to love and hate many things while living in Vermont. The umpteen words for pot drove me crazy, even before I hated smoking, smelling, or seeing the substance. I'll never miss the choking odor of patchouli oil, the flavor of brown rice, or the sight of stir-fried vegetables drenched in tamari sauce. A few people know tamari. I hated the word screwing. I hated all references to sex. Roundhouse, our commune in Vermont, practically made a nun out of me. Roundhouse still occupies my dreams. In my nightmares, my brother and I still race in endless circles, searching for the grown-ups. The grown-ups. The grown-ups believed sending us to Roundhouse would fulfill their dream of a children's utopia, but neither the word dream nor utopia ever described that place. The house in Mission Hill, Boston, where I was born, was named Puddingstone as a nod to the quarries from which our house sprang. Roundhouse's name bowed to Joni Mitchell's song, Circle Game. Irony flooded me years later when I learned that Joni had placed her daughter for adoption. Our grown-ups swore their fondest wish was for us to be raised free. We were meant to be cuddly lambs gambling in the meadows. More often, we resembled Norwegian lemmings, animals with a ferocious survival instinct who turn on creatures far beyond their size. Our parents had planted an idol where nature would nurture us. Fresh air, organic vegetables we grew with our own hands, milk from the cows we raised from calves. Neither cows nor calves materialized, and we spent hours plucking slimy bugs from the few surviving vegetables. I guessed that marching, getting arrested, and saving the world left little time for pushing kids on playground swings and helping with homework. Perhaps my parents considered themselves to have sacrificed for the cause, but I believe they forfeited us. When I hit 15, I decided freedom to them had been just another word for sleeping with each other in any combination that struck their fancy. But holding that belief was impossible. Imagining my mother slipping in and out of the arms of various fathers made me want to throw up. Sacrificing themselves at the stake, like Joan of Arc, was far easier to imagine than all our parents having sex with each other. Anyway, I decided, they were far too humorless to have that much fun. Our grown-ups thought they could be a friends with benefits version of parents, the first generation to have children without struggle, all the while holding fast to the belief that they offered us utopia. When I was born, my mother was very young. I don't think I was ever as young as her.
Thank you, Randy. Do you remember the moment when you realized you had to write this book?
I actually do. Can you still hear me?
Thought you might.
I've been lucky in that every single one of my books have started with a spark, just one spark that ignited the whole world. And at this one, I was at a reunion of Mission Hill folk. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Mission Hill, Boston, but it's where I lived until 15 years ago, and it's where I raised my kids. And Mission Hill is a big part of this book. A good part of it is set there. And I was talking to two friends who were about 10 years older than me, and they're best friends, and they were making fun of themselves from the olden days. The olden days, you hear me? And they said, "Oh, remember when we sent the kids to that commune in Vermont?" And I said, "What?" And they had a commune, the commune on Schiller Street, it was called, and they decided it would be a good thing to send the kids away to their own commune in Vermont and take turns caring for them. And so apparently the kids still make fun of them to this day for it, and nothing bad happened. But that idea planted in my head so deeply, and from that the entire novel was born.
Yes. Have they read the book? Those friends?
I unfortunately, one of them now has Alzheimer's pretty deeply, but her husband has, and he loves it. And I just sent the other one to the other friend. And her husband, who's wonderful and caring for her, is so thrilled by this. So it's really quite nice. We're having the launch party is going to be in Belmont Books next week, and they will be there.
Wonderful. So I think that the best novels, especially novels that take on political or social issues as part of the fabric of the book, do best when they ask questions rather than offer answers. If you had to tell us what is the main question for you of this book, what would it be?
You know, I told you, Ellie, not to tell me the questions beforehand, but I didn't mean it. I mean,
You didn't mean it?
I hate when you listen to me. So annoying. I would say probably the same question. How do you balance your greatest passion if your other greatest passion is raising your children? And for Annabelle, there's 2 points of view, the daughter and the mother. And for Annabelle, that passion for doing good is so huge and comes from an incident that happens when she volunteers for Freedom Summer. And then when she has her children, and she's living in a commune, a political collective, I call it, not in an audience like this, but in straight audiences, I call it a political collective, so people don't think I'm writing about, like, I don't know, you know what I'm saying. And she is so torn between her love for her daughter and what she wants to do. And I think that, and I thought it was fascinating, that could be just as true whether you're an activist or whether you're a CEO of Hasbro Industries. So that was one of the biggest questions I had. And the other big question I had, is if something really awful happens in a family, how and can you reconnect? And for me, family meant broader than just the immediate family.
Of course, the CEO of Hasbro just hires a nanny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she could get a commune.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, that's pretty much the same question, I would say, is at the heart of this. And I think that you're right. You know, most people in our culture have to balance work and family in some way, if they have family, or, you know, So it's not just that, but when your work is activism and it's not contributing usually to the household budget, in fact, it rarely contributes to the household budget. There's also the fact of having to have a job, do your politics, and be the best mom in the world. So Annabelle and her fellow parents in Puddingstone have quite a challenge. So by definition, this is historical fiction.
Which shocked me when people told me that.
I know. when my novel set in the same period came out and I first saw it listed as historical fiction, I was just blown away, and so I looked it up. And by definition, it's any book that is in which most of the action takes place at least 50 years ago, or a good chunk of the action. That's what they call historical.
I still count on my fingers.
Yeah. So you're too young to have lived some of the early parts of that, at least as an adult, you know. So I wonder what kind of research you did for this book, and was it hard to balance the historical research that you did? I know, like me, you can go down those rabbit holes and never come up. But how did you find balancing what you learned in the research with the story, which was coming out of your own head and heart?
That is probably the biggest challenge, but also what I think of as one of the most important things when writing a book like this. And it's not just historical. When I wrote about a roman à clef about the Madoff case, it was the same thing. I had to get all of that research. And what I tell my students is, what keeps people on the page is story and character and propulsion. That's what you want. What nourishes the material is the accuracy of the facts that you're using. And so, for me, I have to read enough and imbibe enough, so to speak, into my soul so that it then flavors everything. Most of all, what you don't want is information dumps. By the way, Alice, do you remember when we were at that march? Well, I do remember, because I was right next to you and you were. So what you want to do is find ways to inform the reader without dumping on the reader. The way I was able to do that is because I write very much from the inside out, which means that I become every character I'm writing from, which becomes a little strange, like when you're writing from certain people. And so, even though I didn't live it, I was alive during it. And I was a very lonely girl as a child, which made me soak in everything I read from the books. And so I am seeing this time through my characters, and hope that my readers are living it with Annabelle and with Ivy. So I'm not writing about the demonstrations in Harvard Yard. The reader is with Annabelle, who's terrified of the police in Harvard Yard. So it's all, and some of the research I did shocked me. I mean, it shocked me that, I don't know everything in the world. And one particular instance where it was quite kismet is, I don't know if anybody here grew up in Boston. Well, I don't know if anybody remembers the the Mothers for Adequate Welfare. It was a big movement, and there were big riots in Mattapan when they took over the welfare building. Well, I really immersed myself in that, because that just fascinated me. And from that grew a whole nother piece of the novel, where I was able to put together. Some of you might remember how men and women used to argue during the movement, like about women's roles and men's roles. Anybody remember vaguely some of that stuff in the chore charts and all of those kind of things. So when Annabelle gets pregnant, the men in the house decide she should give it to the man and go get food stamps. And she doesn't want to. She's embarrassed by that. She feels like she's playing poor. Anyway, it's all in the book. So from that, I had her get involved with Mothers for Adequate Welfare. And all of these then served, and really I think this is maybe answering your question, all of this served to one of the other cores of the book I wanted to explore, which is the white woman's naivete. Because Annabelle is this white woman who goes to Freedom Summer and quickly learns, really harshly, how naive she is. And then by being at the Mattapan Welfare Office, again learns how naive she is. In fact, I was on the radio today with somebody who I adore, who's a radio broadcaster, and he's black, and he read back to me the part where she is being lectured by a friend, go school yourself, it's not our job to educate you. And so I tried to use the research I did to illustrate the human side of the movement, as well as the history. Long answer, sorry.
No, that's fine. And I'm going to ask you one more for this part. Can you imagine doing what Annabelle did?
Good question. When I was 11 years old, I was very obsessed at that point with Holocaust novels and slavery novels. You can see nobody was overseeing me because this is what I was spending my life doing. And I thought life was very unfair. And I didn't come from a political family, true that? Just from a family that wasn't around. So we got to be whoever we wanted to be. And I wanted to be a slavery and Holocaust scholar, apparently. And so I felt really torn, thinking, oh my God, nobody knows about this. It's not the smartest 11-year-old. And so I thought I would go around and knock on the door of every person, like, I don't know, across the world, and tell them about this. And then people go, oh, whew, where were our heads? So I think that little girl is still inside me. And I have participated in a lot of activist kind of things, but never to the extent anywhere near that Annabelle did. So I think this is my grown-up version of that 11-year-old armchair radical. So I guess that's how you would describe me. Much more of an armchair radical who is much more comfortable being alone and writing than being out there and doing more intense stuff.
One of the ways that I understand as an adult about this tightrope between activism and family comes from my 20-odd years on the board of the Rosenberg Fund for Children, which the organization which benefits from book sales tonight, although Broadside hasn't shown up, so there might not be any.
No, we do have books to sell, and it's still I believe in Plan B. Always have a Plan B, and my husband delivered the Plan B from the trunk of the car.
So the Rosenberg Fund for Children gives grants to children of activists and to young adult activists who have been targeted and harmed for their political activism. And my daughter Jen, over here, raise your hand, who's the executive director of the RFC, will be available afterwards if people don't know about the organization and would like to learn. And so that's just my plug for that. One of the reasons that Randy and I decided to do this together is that my 2020 novel, Her Sister's Tattoo, shares a lot of themes with this book.
Can I?
Yeah, you want to jump in?
Let me jump in a little bit. Let me ask you a few questions. So we share a lot of connective tissue in my sister's tattoo, covering family and found family, which is something I think we both do in all of our books, family and found family, through the decades. And in tattoo, it's from 1968 to 2003. So we followed them for 35 years. Mine, we have 55 years. Not that I'm trying to outdo you, but yeah. But there is the fraught bond of mother and daughters in both of them. And you also have sisters. And in some ways, the many mothers and the many mothers are also sisters. And there are all those fraught bonds. So I was thinking about what is really the most similar. And I'd like you to talk about what you think about this. One of the most notable things for me is how we both wrote about unintended consequences. And I think that's a huge thing. And I worked with criminals for well over 10 years, and I used to talk to them because they'd always say, well, you don't know why I did it. You know, you'll understand once, you know, because they were batterers. Once I tell you why, you'll know why I did it. Sure, buddy. And we all have a good reason for doing stuff, but then we're surprised by what happens. And I describe it as when idealism collides with reality, good intentions can be cold comfort as the collateral damage mounts. So do you think that unintended consequences was some of the fabric of my sister's tattoo?
I think of it as collateral damage.
Mm-hmm.
That's the term that rings true for me. So her sister's tattoo, as Randy said, is bookended by two massive political demonstrations. 1968, Detroit against the war in Vietnam. 2003, Manhattan against the invasion of Iraq. And these two sisters in 1968 come across mounted cops beating protesters and try to help. And in the process of helping, badly injure a cop. He's part of the collateral damage. One sister wants to make a big political trial because that's what people did in those years. The other has a baby, and she's offered a plea bargain to stay out of prison. They're charged with felonies, big felonies. But in order to get the plea bargain, she has to testify against her sister. So, you know, and that's what begins the story. But I agree with you, the unintended consequences, I mean, none of us know what any of our actions are going to bring, right? Even when they're not, you know, throwing hard green apples at mounted cops, that they might have known the consequences might not be too pretty, but still. And remember, all of these characters we're talking about are young. They're in their 20s. And I don't see anybody here in their 20s, but we all remember what it was like to be that age. So yeah, I think I agree with you that unintended consequences is a big it's a theme in both of these books. And I think
I know in my book, we see them right through to when they're in their 70s, which I had a ball with doing that. And something very awful happens, and I don't want to say what it is because I don't want to be a spoiler, but some of the, especially Ivy's father, perseverates over and over again. Why didn't I realize that? And I think that's something, as we get older, we really have to come to grips with. Why didn't I? And at some point, you have to come to peace with that. And I know in the case of Annabelle, she just keeps on doing good right through, including during COVID. So I find it a fascinating question. Mm-hmm. And I love looking at a life for so long.
I also noticed that in both of these novels, we moved the narration from the mother to the daughter. And did you always know that Ivy was going to get a chance to tell her side of this story?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. First of all, I do that in almost all my novels. I have different family members, and so, and you're in different families no matter who's telling the story. And Ivy's story is as important as Annabelle's story, but often the mothers don't understand that their daughters' lives are just as real to the daughters as the mothers are to the mothers. And so I love flipping back and forth between the voices. I really do. Did you like going between the voices?
I loved it too, but also in my book, one of the themes is how we as adults pass our values or fail to pass our values from one generation to the next. And so it just made perfect sense to have the daughter take over the narration of the story.
And that's one of the major themes in my book. Duh, that's the other connective tissue. It's all about how many values in the end are really passed on. We got a lot. They're really like sisters, our book.
Yeah. I just want to let's open this up to conversation and questions from you guys, because I'm sure that Randy has sparked some questions here, and Priya has a mic.
And just to make it interesting, in case people are feeling shy, I have a prize for the first one who asks a question. And now I'm just trying to find it. Jeff, do you know where the white, or Jill, do you know where the white thing is? The white bag? The Brilliant Earth bag? Priya's trying to steal it. Oh, Priya, that's just not, yeah. But there isn't, but trust me, it's a really good prize.
So who has the first question?
Really is good. Yes? Okay, Peggy, you're not going to get the prize because you already have one of these at your house, so.
Oh, no. So when you wrote about the children, I mean, I think I remember romanticizing when I was a kid the kibbutz life, you know, because my friend and I, Judy, wanted to go there and get rid of our parents, and so we could live and be raised, you know, in those children's houses and such. I remember that fantasy and telling it to my mom that we were leaving for kibbutz life. That didn't go over very well. But how did you? I mean, since I haven't read the book yet, how did you? Was it research, or did you look at those kinds of communes where children were raised separately, and how? And it sounds like they were just running around fields being ignored.
No, they weren't just running around fields. They were homeschooled in a barn. It was very serious and very I built it. I built it in my head. They did in some small way. Annabelle's husband, Guthrie, had spent like 3 weeks in a kibbutz. So yeah, it'll be like a kibbutz because he knew so much about kibbutz life from those 3 weeks. But basically, they built it. And the woman who really wants to do it lives there full time. And she really kind of runs the show. But most of it is based on feminist theory together with back to the land theory. And what was the name of those people who wrote those books? The Nearys. Helen and Scott Neary. So one of the things that I did when I was researching this book was buy all those old books back. So I read Growth and Development of Motherhood by Angela McBride, and Back to the Earth by the Nearys, and How to Have Healthy Children. You know, and I found an original. I had a friend who had the original Our Bodies, Our Cells. So it was really based on very original materials that I gathered. And I also had a ton of friends who had done this. I mean, this was easy to imagine. The only thing that really came from my own life is the chore chart. When they're in Puddingstone, there's a chore chart. Remember chore charts when you lived in group houses? Ms. Magazine. Did I get like incredible politics from Ms. Magazine? No, I got a great chore chart idea. where instead of having like a chore wheel, everything was assigned points. Because I really hated when I lived in a house with people, and people were assigned stuff, but they didn't do it. I like cleanliness, right, Jill? We like cleanliness? Mm-hmm. So I built a thing where you had to get a certain amount of points. It was a free-spirited kind of chore chart. So all of the stuff I'm building, that some came from, I did live in like 3 or 4 communal situations. I had some communal child-raising experience, and then I just take it and blow it up. Wait a minute, we have the prize for you. My husband found it. He hates things. Oh, you'll have to come. Priya will bring it to you because I'm like stuck here. This is all book clubs that ever do my book. Get in touch with me. Everybody gets a PDF and the leader gets this. My sister's on here somewhere. Yeah, she's on the back. It's all of our family recipes, and it goes to, oh God, this is my sister when she had straight hair. Mm-hmm. No. And oh, now that I think about it, none of the recipes are hers.
Now we have to hear the question.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to deserve this book or not because you don't know about my question, but your title is, I did read The Murderer's Daughters, but which I loved, but your title of The Many Mothers of, and then having read The Murderer's Daughters and learning about a negligent mother in that novel, I think it's interesting, The Many Mothers, and wondered if there was any kind of corrective experience for you in exploring something where exploring a community where there was not just a dearth of mothers, but maybe there were too many or there were several, and whether, in terms of how you experienced the writing process in all of that.
Well, the actual title comes from a line in the book. Titling a book is tough. And there's a point when Ivy, when she's at Roundhouse, turns to her friend and says, I might as well not be Ivy Pascal anymore, which is her real name. Why don't you just call me Ivy Puddingstone? And that's where the title came from. For me, the many mothers are not evil. All of them are very good. The problem is, sometimes Ivy really misses her mother. And so there are people around, but there's not that one person. And so I think that's what I explored. You can have a lot of wonderful people around you, but you need a touch point. It doesn't have to be a mother, it can be a somebody. But in fact, what really happens is sometimes by having so many mothers, if everybody's responsible, sometimes the problem might be that nobody's responsible, if that makes some sense. And one of the things that happens is that the children are thought to be much more mature than they are, and believe they're going to make much better decisions, as we all know the decisions we made, than they do. And they're pretty young when they start there. So for me, exploring mothers and daughters, I know all writers have their obsessions, and I'm not blind to mine, and exploring family systems is certainly a big thing. And so this was a very involving thing for me in terms of exploring the two things that matter most to me: my relationship with my daughters, and my desire to see the world in good shape. And you can't always get what you want. Wow, that was heavy. But you can still have the cookbook. And as you can tell, there is some humor in the book, too. It's not all like, oi, Sturmendrang, wees mir. There's some lighter moments. No other questions?
I want to piggyback on Peggy's question because, there are precedents in the world for people sending their kids away for safety during war or political upheaval. And when I was reading this book, I was thinking about that. I was thinking about the kinder transport during the Second World War. And, you know, the African National Congress sent their kids out of South Africa to a neighboring country because it was just too dangerous to be there. And in Lawrence, the Bread and Roses strike, strikers sent their kids out of town. And I wonder if you had done any research into any of those, or were you aware of them at all? Because they kept coming up for me, very different from this Vermont barn and house, but still, you know, it's an idea that has some heft.
And in fact, I don't want to misrepresent the adults of Puddingstone. It came about after the Kent Street murders, Kent State murders, and they were all very involved. And when Kent State happened, I don't know how many, I remembered it, of course, but going back and reading the original sources, and I went back and I read, you know, all the newspapers and all the accounts, I was like, whoa! And so they do, that's the moment at which they decide they have to do something to protect their children. And they really did think there was going to be blood in the streets. And so they made the decisions for a very good and caring reason. And then, you know, the section that I read from Ivy, that's one snapshot in time. That's a teenager saying, well, you know what we say when we're teenagers. And so I feel like I bring it to the right conclusion. I don't judge any of them, and I love them all so much. That sounds corny, huh? Whatever. Any other questions? Because no, there's no bad question.
Anti-Vietnam. Oh, I'm sorry. You're doing the anti-Vietnam era, but that's when feminism also came. Mm-hmm. Is that a conflict in the book at all?
Oh, yes. There's big argument in Puddingstone over which cause is more important. And in fact, one of the characters, Suze, writes for the real paper, not the Boston Phoenix, before it became the real paper. And she writes an article just when now is starting to emerge. And the men in the house are basically making fun of the whole concept. So that's another piece that I love exploring, is the jarring fights between which cause is more important. And, you know, Annabelle is working very hard on the Stop I-95. And her boyfriend, Guthrie, thinks you should be just working on Vietnam. So yes, and feminism is very much a huge piece of this. In fact, above my daughter's crib used to be the sign, the poster, "Sisterhood is powerful, springtime will never be the same." And I look at pictures and I go, whew, what a charming little crib mobile to have.
Other questions? Yes. Oh, wait a second.
Yeah, so when in this book, is the book set on Mission Hill?
The book is set for, you know, a great deal of the book is set in Mission Hill. Rhinebeck is a character. It starts in Mississippi, Greensboro, Mississippi, goes to Boston, Mission Hill, to Vermont, back to Mission Hill, to JP.
Okay.
I don't like to have to research by traveling too far. So I always use places where I live.
So I'm just curious if you could tell us a little bit more about Mission Hill. I mean, I was at Boston University in the 70s.
Mission Hill.
Late 60s, you know, during the Vietnam era, basically. And so Mission Hill is something that was in my consciousness, but was that Crazy Rag from Mission Hill, or was that Fort Hill?
Crazy Riot?
Rag. It was a hippie newspaper, yeah.
We had the Good News. I worked on that, if that's what you're talking about. That hippie rag. Yeah, there was a hippie rag. And I wore hippie rag, so it was all very thematic.
So did it feel like a neighborhood or?
Mission Hill is a neighborhood that abuts JP. It's considered part of Roxbury. It's where the mission church is. It's a small, very tight neighborhood. I moved there when I had just given birth to my older daughter, and that was 1973. And Mission Hill this is just around the time that Boston neighborhoods were being redlined. And Mission Hill was iconic and different in that a lot of the indigenous Irish Catholic who had been there for years, they said, we're staying. And so it became a very mixed neighborhood. And one of the things that mixed it up was us, the newcomers, or as they like to call us sometimes, the bomb tossers. And we came in, and at first there was a lot of sort of like this between the newcomers and the regular folk, and they treated us a little weird, but we all had kids. And they all played together, and they were all in play groups together, and they went to nursery school together. And in fact, it was really it really kind of got very mixed up. And then I became a bartender at a local bar, so I really got to know everybody. And one of the things I write about in the book is that mixing up between the two groups, where the men joined the softball league, and there was a softball league, and the hippie softball league was called Leo's, but everybody else called them the Bomb Tossers League team. And then the women went to the playground. And in the book, it's like, you think you're so cool because you go to the bars and drink with them. Why don't you try, going up to the playground with your kids and play with them? So and I wrote recently to one of my old neighbors that I had based one of the characters on her. And I said, I hope she's okay with that. And, one of the women who's just instrumental in becoming a friend of Annabelle's. So yes, Mission Hill is very much a character. Mission Hill was, at that point, a very interesting neighborhood. There was a movie that was made by filmmaker Richard Broadman, Mission Hill and the Miracle of Boston. So, yeah, Mission Hill's a big character. I loved raising my kids there. It was great. It's become quite expensive and studenty, and there's I grew up in Mission Hill Facebook group, and most of the people don't live there anymore. A lot of the old timers do still live there, but it's sort of like, neighborhoods really change, so it's become expensive, and a lot of people were totally priced out like every place else in Boston.
I was just wondering what the children made of what their parents were doing and what their parents' concerns were. Did they understand a lot of what was driving their parents, or were they in fear of repression, what might happen to their parents as political activists? I remember those years pretty well, and that seemed an important part of it to me.
They were very self-centered, just like kids tend to be. They were afraid for their parents. Like Ivy's brother is always worried that, are the Kent Street people going to kill us? And so it's very much through their children's eyes. So there's tremendous fear, and there's also a tremendous sense of, as they get a little bit closer to teenagers, of that sarcasticness, that teenagers like to get on, like, oh, your mother's probably not coming because it's Mao Zedong's birthday. Right. So there's a mix of the fear, and no matter who your parents are, you're going to rebel against them. So if they're very conservative, you'll rebel another way, and if they're very radical, you might rebel another way. But mainly, they are sort of like, they build their own little world. They really do.
I think our time is pretty much up. You want to tell us anything about what you're working on now besides birthing a new novel and bringing it into the world? Are you working on a new book?
I am working on a new book. It's now I've gone over the deep end. I thought this one was the deep end, but now I'm building an entire world where there's a skein of people throughout the world, mainly the women are in charge, and when things get so bad in the world, they're activated and free will has to be overcome. And they only can recognize each other by the gold glint in their eyes. I had to bring jewelry in too, they have bangles. So yeah, it's about a strain of women that walk among us who, when things get so awful, will come in to save us.
We'll see you back in a few years, okay? Please join us for some refreshments.
Tons of excited donuts.